Hi folks, HR Funk here with part 2 in my series on accurizing my new Remington Model 700 SPS varmint rifle. If you missed the first part of this series, I would say go back and watch it, because in part 1 I talk about all the various things that I'm looking at upgrading on this rifle. And starting in this video, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the why and which and all that. I'm just going to be starting into making those modifications. So the first video is only about 15 minutes long. If you missed it, go back and take a look. But in this part, I'm going to get right into it, and we're going to look at upgrading the optics mounting platform. So here we go. So here I've secured the rifle in the vise, and you can see the optic mounting base that I have currently is the one that I mentioned in the first video. This is the Warne, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, W-A-R-N-E. And I'm going to have to remove the scope before I can get to the base itself in order to swap it out. So I've got my trusty wrench, and I'm just going to be loosening these nuts. This is the action sequence in the video, everyone. So try to contain your enthusiasm. And just that quickly, I am able to remove the scope. Now I'm going to work on removing the base itself. And next up, we have the bases themselves with the proper star bit. And this is only slightly more dramatic than the last scene. And I may well edit the video just to make this all a little bit faster. And the front base is removed. By the way, something to be aware of if you're doing this at home is these screws are different lengths. This is the rear base, and they are longer screws. The front base that you see here has shorter screws. So just be aware of that if you're making a swap like this on your own rifle. Next, I'm going to go ahead and degrease these screw holes. And for this, I'm using alcohol. And no, Rabbi, this is rubbing alcohol. I did not just pour this out of my hip flask. So knock that off. And the idea is to get any oil or foreign material or anything else out of these screw holes, so that when I torque down the scope base here in a couple of minutes, and I put a little bit of Loctite on the screws, there's nothing that is going to prevent that from adhering properly and making sure that base stays good and secure. And I'll go ahead and blow these out now, just to make sure I don't have any alcohol left down in there. And there we go. Next, I'm going to do a preliminary check of my new optic base. And by the way, this is a Midwest Industries aluminum base that was provided to me by Optics Planet. And if you notice, this base only goes on one way. If you try to put it on the wrong way, the screw holes will not line up properly and you won't be able to install it. This is a zero cant base, so it does not add any elevation to the optic. And I'm just going to put this on here right now and test it to make sure that it's more or less flat, that there's no machining imperfections in the optic base that are going to cause a problem, and I don't feel anything at all. So that should be good. Next, I'm going to start my screw installation. Interestingly, with the Midwest Industries mount, the screws provided are all the same length. Now, if you remember before with the Warne mount, the screws for the holes in the back were longer than the screws for the holes in the front. But the difference in this rail is that the holes that are drilled for the screws are different depths. So that compensates for the difference in the screws, and Midwest Industries is able to use all the same screw length. And I am going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on these screws, just a little bit. It is easy, very easy, to overdo Loctite. So I'm only putting just a little bit on, and I'll get this started here. And I'm not going to be torquing these screws just yet. I am just getting them started, or at least I'm going to try to. And that'll hold it till I can get the rest put into place. I think I'll pause the video now. This is going to be the exact same thing you just saw over and over and over again, so that's not going to be too exciting. And I'll pick it back up when I get all the screws in place. And the last thing I'm going to do is torque these screws down into place. Now, the Midwest Industries rail did not come with any instructions or any torque specifications, and I just tried to call Midwest Industries and of course could not get a hold of anyone. So I'm going to use sort of a generic torque setting of 20 inch-pounds, which I think should be fine. And I'm just going to tighten these slowly. And they are all now torqued to 20 inch-pounds. One of the reasons that I started out with replacement of the optics mounting rail was for convenience, because with the new rail installed, I can now secure the rifle in my Real Avid Master Gun vise, which has a groove cut in the vise jaws to fit the optics mounting rail, and I can position the rifle in this sort of an orientation to address the next thing. And this is one of my biggest complaints, if not my biggest complaint, with this factory rifle, and it is this factory stock. So I'm going to be removing the factory stock and getting ready to replace it with something new that I think is going to be much better. So to start things off, I am just going to open the magazine base plate and take the tension off the magazine spring. And now I really wish I had gone with the ADL version of this rifle, which would have been the lesser expensive version. When I bought this, I thought that I was going to be using it with the factory stock, and I wanted the bottom metal like this so that I could open the magazine and release the ammunition inside without having to cycle it through the action. As it turns out, I ended up paying for this bottom metal that I'm going to not use, so this is going to go into a parts bin. But I once again have my Brownell screwdriver with the proper size bit. And something I noticed, you might have realized or might have just seen how easily that screw turned. When I checked these screws after my initial accuracy test with this rifle, they were not particularly tight. So that probably didn't do anything to aid in the accuracy that I was getting during that test. And I'm just going to take these out of here. And that should allow the bottom metal to come right off just like that. And that should allow the stock to come right off the rifle. And here you can see this stock. There is nothing in the way of bedding in here. There's not even any pillars in the holes for the bolts or anything. So nothing at all. And up here in the front, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, there are these pads that were bearing against the barrel and preventing that free float. So there's really nothing about this stock that I like, which is why it's going to be replaced. The stock that's going to be replacing that Remington factory unit is this Magpul Hunter stock. And I've used a stock like this previously on my Ruger American Hunter rifle, and for the most part I like it quite a bit. There are a few things that I wish were different, and I'm going to be covering the stock in detail in a future episode of this series. But for now, I'm just going to work on the installation, which is pretty straightforward. Now, if I wanted to, it is possible to use the factory Remington bottom metal with this stock and just replace it as though it was part of the factory stock. But since I'm not going to be doing that, there is a spacer here that needs to come out. If I can get it out of there. Maybe I need to do this off camera where I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. And give me just a moment here to get that out. That spacer was a little bit tough to get out of there. It took some work. By the way, I can also get rid of my factory magazine well because I'm not going to be reusing this. And I can now position the new stock right onto the barreled action. And I'll get ready for the next part, which is going to be installing what's going to replace the factory bottom metal. So rather than the Remington factory magazine and bottom metal, what I'm going to be using is a Magpul trigger guard and magazine well, which accepts a 5-shot Magpul AICS pattern magazine. So I'm changing the configuration of the rifle a little bit. I'm going from the internal 4-round magazine to a detachable 5-round box magazine, and I think that's going to add some versatility to the rifle. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about some of these upgrades and exactly how they change the way this rifle can be used in a future video. So I'm going to try to do this so you can see it as best I can, but the new trigger guard and magazine assembly fits down inside the stock just like that. Now I'm going to replace the factory action screws. The shorter of the two screws goes in the front, and the longer screw goes in the rear. And by the way, I'm not going to be torquing these down. I'm just putting them into position right now to give you an idea of what this is going to look like. And let me flip the rifle over and you'll be able to get a better look. And there's a look at the barreled action inside its new stock. Here's the new magazine that's going to work in this magazine well. And I'll do a quick check here. If you can't see, I have a very good free float now in this barrel. No contact at all between the barrel and the stock all the way back to the recoil lug. So this is addressing a lot of those issues that I had with the factory stock. This is also a much more rigid stock, and it has, I should have shown you this before I put it all together, an internal aluminum bedding block. So when I torque the action bolts down to the stock or to the action, that's going to bed the bottom of the receiver against that aluminum bedding block to really give a good rigid connection between the stock and the barreled action to stop with any movement of the action inside of the stock under recoil. And this is going to give me a lot better performance, I am sure, than the stock that was on here from Remington to begin with. So before I torqued the bolts down, I decided to pull everything back apart again and just give you a look at that aluminum bedding block. You can see it runs the entire length of the receiver, and also it extends back into the stock even farther to give that good rigid bedding between the barreled action and the stock. So when it comes to torquing the action bolts, there is a procedure for this, and the torque specifications for these screws from Magpul are 55 to 60 inch-pounds. So what I'm going to do is first give the rifle butt a couple of good wraps on the bench, and what I'm doing is seating the recoil lug against the stock, or actually against the bedding block inside, and while I'm holding pressure on the barrel, I am going to first tighten the front action bolt. Then I can release the barrel and tighten the rear action bolt once I get the bit inserted there. And both bolts are now properly torqued in place. And the last thing for this segment of the series is going to be a function test with some dummy ammunition and the new stock and magazine to make sure ammunition feeds properly and smoothly through the action. And yes, it does, no problem whatsoever. And that's going to do it for this segment, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. In part 3 of this series, I'm going to take a look at this trigger and replacing the factory X Mark Pro with something new that's going to be an upgrade for that as well. Until then, if you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 7% off your purchase from Optics Planet. And I want to say thanks again to Optics Planet for partnering with me on this project. Everything you see me using is coming from Optics Planet. Thanks to them again. And if you want to help support the channel, one of the ways is to use that discount code when you go to Optics Planet. Also, remember Hot Munitions. If you go to Hot Munitions, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFunk10, and that'll save you some money on your purchase from Hot Munitions. And remember the Target sponsor for the channel, folks. Go to Target's online, check out their inventory, and see if they have anything that's going to meet your Target needs. See you next time. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.